welcome to Mavericks of Data. I'm your host, Krish, and I'm from Data. Of course, you can see my t-shirt. This is a series of engaging discussions that we are having with data leaders and data gurus across the world who are sharing their thoughts on best practices around data and how they have enabled organizations of various sizes, whether it's going to be small or large enterprise, and how they have scaled them successfully, some of the best practices around it, and also, probably every nook and corner of anything that's related to data. So on this episode, we have a special guest. He is the CTO of Fujitsu Australia, and we have Mahesh today with us, who will be sharing his thoughts on data and everything around data. So let's jump into the show right away. Hey, hi Mahesh, how are you? Thanks for joining us this evening. How are things at your end?
Yeah, good. It's Friday, so can't really complain. And we've got a long weekend. So Monday is a public holiday here. So can't
Gotcha.
complain.
I mean, like of all the things that you could do on Friday evening, you decided to chat with us. So thank you so much for that. Right. And
Great.
also, I have a little birdie telling me that you happen to be my super, super, super senior from school.
Yeah, so which school did you go to? So you went to PS Senior, is that right? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I'm a super senior or something that I don't
I
know.
know, exactly. Hey, thank you so much for joining. I mean, this is really a series of engaging discussions that we've been having with various data leaders across the world, and of course, now it's I think we've been trying to go about this for a while, so I'm happy that we finally got a chance to get on with it. So to set some context, or to as a starting point, I think it'll be really good if you can probably speak about yourself and your current role and how things are laid out at your end. I think that'll be a great point for us to start the discussion.
Okay, sure. Look, my name is Mahesh Krishnan. I am the CTO for Fujitsu here in Oceania. So Oceania basically means Australia and New Zealand. I've been in this role. Look, I joined Fujitsu last year, so I haven't been in this role for very long. And before that, I've worked in other companies. I've been in the energy sector for the last, was in the energy sector, I should say, before I joined Fujitsu for about 5 years or so. And before that, I was a CTO at Telstra Health. It's a completely different domain. And then I was in consulting for a number of years as well, at a company what is now known as Telstra Purple. So look, I moved to Australia in 22 years. I was going to be here for 2 years. I was working in the Bay Area, and I said my family was had already moved over here, and they kept pressurizing me. I said, like, you know what? I'm going to be here for 2 years, and then I'm going to head back to the Bay Area. 22 years later, I'm still here. So look, my background has been primarily, I started my career as a software engineer, and I kind of grew up the ranks. I've been holding, I suppose, leadership positions in companies, both kind of like a mix of, technology management, kind of leadership positions for a while now. I can't remember how long, but it's been a while. I think that's probably my sweet spot as well. Come to think about it, yeah. So that's me in a nutshell, yeah. So yeah.
I mean, it'll be pretty good, right? I mean, taking over as CTO for Fujitsu Australia, I'm pretty sure that you cover like a very, very broad scope, so it'll be really nice if we can double click some of those core nuances in terms of what you broadly cover under as CTO for the Fujitsu Australia.
Okay, sure. Look, the CTO role at Fujitsu is very different to a lot of other companies that I've been in. It's we are in previous companies, like I haven't even I did a role of a CTO. It covers kind of like responsibility deliveries as well. So responsible for delivering some of those things as well. Here at Fujitsu, I'm more focused on technology adoption with customers, right? So don't have to worry about delivery, which is actually a great thing. So there are other people who actually look at it. Look, one good thing about Fujitsu, it's a very purpose-driven company. So like, our purpose is to make the world more sustainable by building trust in society through innovation. That's kind of like the purpose of the company itself. And unlike a lot of other companies where, the purpose kind of like gets put into nice slide decks and brochure and things like that, Fitz is very different. Maybe it's because of the Japanese background or whatever it is. It's kind of like built into the fabric of the company itself. Like everything that we do, we have a very sustainability focus and everything else. And about maybe 18 months ago or something like that, we kind of like rebranded, if I can call it the word, under something known as Fujitsu Uvance. So that kind of like sets us. It breaks down the offerings and how we do business into about four verticals and 4 verticals and 3 horizontals. So all the horizontals, unlike a lot of other companies where you have verticals such as financials and manufacturing and so on, ours is like very different. We call things like healthy living and trusted society and things like that, right? And a lot of those things come, and a lot of industry verticals kind of like fall under that. Yeah. So we again have that sustainability focus, hence the carefully chosen words such as trusted society and healthy living and consumer experience and so on. Now, the horizontals are again, like that. Those are also the cross-cutting concerns that kind of like spread across multiple industries as well, right? Now, underpinning a lot of these things is what we actually call as 5 key technology areas, and that is where my focus is, right? So those 5 technology areas, like we have computing, which is it's very different because when people talk about computing, they think about things like cloud computing. For us, it's more around things like quantum computing and HPCs and that kind of stuff. Networking is another one, which is again traditionally, people think about networking as kind of like LAN kind of thing. Here we are focused more on things like 5G and even the next generation 6G. Of course, AI is very, very prominent for us as one of the core technologies, right? We have converging technologies, which is like how you combine a lot of the other technologies with bringing in the human element and the social sciences to it, right? And last but not the least, I kind of like left to the ends, is what we call as data and security, right? Kind of like I kind of like brought to the ends because he was kind of supposed more data oriented company and things like that. So data and security is one of those the ones that I look out for as well, right? So my focus is more around how we innovate using these technologies, right? And kind of like getting people to adopt these technologies as well. Look, one thing I'll say about Fujitsu is like we're very good at a lot of things. Being a service provider, we are within one of the little known fact, we're still one of the top 10 service providers in the world, right? And we're very good at moving companies' workloads to the cloud or running help desk and things like that. That is what we're known for. But I want to kind of like, this is an area, these 5 core technologies, an area that we want to make sure we promote that and kind of like, I suppose, we want to talk more about it and make sure people know about these 5 technologies. That's my kind of my role, I guess. The answer.
I mean, it's just so difficult to even put it in a box because each of these topics is just like very vast and it's a subject by itself, right? But like as you rightly pointed out, considering the kind of audience that we would we are going to have for the show and so on and so forth, I think data and security is a great place for us to double click and and speak a little bit more on. So when you say data and security, I'm understanding that you're looking at going from zero trust environment to trust everything environment of sorts. Can you speak to that evolution on for example, you can probably double click on what's the current state look like, and what's the evolution of that look like? I think that will be very valuable for the audience as well.
Look, it's interesting, right? So if you look at the current state of data and security, right? I mean, there are a few things that are in play. I think one is the fact that there's obviously like an increased threat landscape. There are more threat actors. There are more data to protect. You have like IoT and everything. So there's one aspect of that, right? So we're now generating more data than we ever did, and we got kind of like protect the data that we're actually generating, right? And there are lots of things like insider threats, and there's lots of data breaches that are happening around the world. So those are the kind of things that we need to worry about. Now, on top of that, you have whole bunch of government regulations and legislation and everything else that's starting to work on all these things. Now with all these things in place, right? So whenever it is important that, and of course, Web3 has been it's one of the things that gets spoken about a fair bit as well. But if you look at data per se, there are a number of things that we need to worry about. I mean, the three things that we talk about, the triad of CIA, like confidentiality, integrity, and availability, still play a part in everything that we do, right? Now, with data, I mean, what we are basically saying is like we kind of like with all these things like threat and everything else, right? Now, trusting data becomes very difficult. How do you actually threat? The security around it is becoming a problem. So we have kind of like decided to invest a lot of our effort into some of these, like the distributed trust kind of thing, right? This is where all the blockchain technologies and all that come into play. So we believe, in terms of confidentiality and things like that, technologies like blockchain kind of like have that implicit cryptography built into it, kind of thing, right? So that's one thing. In things of, if you think about things like integrity, again, because you have distributed ledger, right? You cannot any manipulation of the data that actually happens on the blockchain, kind of like immediately gets, I suppose, like everybody gets to know about it. So that's the other thing that gets taken care of. And of course, availability, because it's distributed in nature. Even if one of those things goes down, you have other distributed database, because it's distributed in nature. I mean, the other things can actually take care of that, right? So that's one of those things that we actually are focusing on. I mean, like we're doing a lot of development. There's a lot of, I spoke about our sustainability being one of the core things in that we focus on as a company, right? Trust is one of those things in terms of like, supply chain is a very good example. A lot of people even talk about very simple things like, hey, look, I'm trying to buy organic things. So how do you kind of like trace that all the way from the farm onto the kitchen bench, for example, right? So those kind of things we focus on, right? So yeah, so in a nutshell, that's what it is.
Gotcha. So, I mean, like, it's a couple of things that's really caught my attention. One was when you spoke about the legislation, regulation, compliances, and so on and so forth. The other one is the IoT devices, right? So, I want to pick your brain on this because I know that, with respect to IoT devices, there is huge amount of data that's outflowing. And when you add the regulation or like, compliance norms on top of it, like IRAP and so on and so forth, handling PI data becomes a little bit of, I wouldn't say headache, a little bit of, threat per se, because we're talking about data breach and so on and so forth. So, how would an organization such as Fujitsu go about managing the outflow of information from IoT devices, and then managing the regulatory and compliance norms? How do you really go about it?
Look, there's no simple answer to it. Right? So like the whole thing is like you need to have like a good governance, right? I mean, that's one of those things that I actually say, like stress enough, I can't stress enough, I should say, right? You got to have good governance and systems in place to actually, get this thing done. Now, one of the things I'll actually say, look, I've actually worked on smaller organizations like startups and so on and so forth, right? And one of the things that you find is that when you start small, you probably don't have all those things in place, good policies and good structures and everything else in place, right? And that's probably okay. Now, one of the companies that I actually worked with, right? I mean, very small company, and if it's a startup, it actually starts to, you kind of like start to grow very quickly kind of thing. Lots of things suddenly happen. You're successful. Originally you had a few things put in place, but as you start to scale out, those procedures and policies and things like that aren't enough anymore. I mean, that's the key thing, right? So typically what we've done is like get in an external audit and get to make sure some of your procedures and policies and your governance and all those things are in place, right? And typically these people, external consultancies would come in and give you a bit of a rating in terms of like where you stand, like a NIST score, for example. It may not be a NIST score. On a scale of 0 to 5, where do you actually stand? It could be like based on your company, on what you do and everything else. You don't have to be a 5 on that scale, right? So you might come out and say, hey, look, I think based on what the company does and where they are, they've got so many users, they've got all these things. You may say, hey, look, you probably need to aim for a 3 or a 3.2, or maybe a 4, or whatever, maybe less than that, right? So you say, look, I think you need to be like a 3. Okay, that's the thing that actually comes up based on all the risk rating and everything else. And then we say, like, where are you based on your policies and things like that? And you may be like a 2 or a 1.6, and that's okay, right? So but at least now you say, hey, look, we are supposed to be at a 3.2, we are now at a 2. This is the gap that we need to address, right? So you start to then like class. You may have very simple things that you may not even classify the data that you're actually doing, for example, right? So all those things will actually come out in the audit, and then you say, look, this is not there, and you say, look, what is the are we encrypting all the key data that we have, like the PII and so on and so forth? Are those things being encrypted? Is the transmission of data from things like IoT devices and all that, are they being encrypted as they go along? Are the devices being properly secure? So all these kind of things will actually flush out when you do a good overall audit of these things, right? And then the gap has been identified. Then you kind of like then work through a process where, hey, look, I'm on 2 now, I want to get to 3.2. This is the gap, these are the things that actually needs to be done. It can be clearly written down in terms of the steps that you need to do to actually achieve that, right? You may not have a SOC. You say, hey, look, we need to establish a SOC. So all those kind of things will actually get you there, right? And then it is important that you start to follow those things that you do, like some of these things, just put those things in place right now. Company like Fujitsu and so on will do a lot of these things as well, right? But I'm not here to pitch Fujitsu to say, hey, no, you got to kind of reach out to us. But there are lots and lots of consulting companies that specialize in the security area itself who can actually do these kind of things for you. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. I think it's quite important, especially because we also know that a lot of SaaS startup founders are possibly viewing this as well, right? So just on that interest, what you're saying is it's important for them to get this in line even before they start thinking about, once the data inflow starts coming in, then, now suddenly it goes from your company's data to you being responsible for, your customers' data. So you're saying that it's advisable to get this in order first before you actually plan your GTM. And especially this is true for the startup founders.
Yeah, true. Look, I think initially they all start and they, and it's okay to, like we talk about things like fail fast and, so you've got your ideas and things like that and you do it, right? But once you kind of like start to taste success, right? And then, you're thinking about scaling and things like that, right? You got to be extremely careful. And a lot of startup companies don't take this into effect as they're starting to grow, right? And then they kind of like reach a point where it becomes very difficult to actually go back and fix those things as well, right? And sometimes once the data is out there in the wild, you can't get it back. So if your data is compromised, right, you can't basically say, oh, no, we fixed the problem kind of thing. Hey, the data is already out there. So you got to make sure that, some of these things have to be, you can't be reactive is what I'm trying to say. You got to be a bit more proactive in trying to get these things done. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like it may sound like a very sleazy sales pitch, but I think this is what we did at Hero. We ensured that even before we planned the GTM, we ensured that we got a SOC 2 compliance in place, we got a HIPAA compliance in place, and so on and so forth. Because as we work with companies at scale, this just becomes extremely even more sensitive. I mean, like I can only imagine that probably a company at the scale of Fujitsu has probably a dedicated whole big team that's actually looking into just compliance, right? So if you have to work with someone at that scale, naturally it's important for us to have these things sorted. Now, having said that, that I'm kind of leading into my next set of questions, because this is more towards working with larger customers, because the bigger the company, the bigger the problem, right? So with respect to challenges around sensitivity, data sensitivity within the organization and also outside the organization. So can you double click on some of that in terms of challenges when it comes to larger organization, especially if they're looking for, say, implementing a new tool into their stack or whatever it can be? What are the data sensitive aspects that they need to look into, how big the problem is, and how effectively they can solve it?
Yeah. Look, first, for a lot of these companies, right? So if you're talking about just security and data together, right? I mean, like generally, I would recommend that a lot of these companies, depending on the size of the company, right, as the larger that you get, right, you need to kind of like start to have like some kind of like a data security strategy in place, right? So you need to figure out like what are the business objectives. What are the things that do you have things do you have to worry about things like PCI compliance, right? GDPR, like if you're going to be operating in Europe, you got to start thinking about GDPR, but it's just not Europe, right? I think companies even who are not operating in Europe, it's a good framework to actually, start thinking about what they put into GDPR, for example, right? Yeah, so if you're a financial institution, there'll be a lot of legislative things within your country. There'll be things like data sovereignty issues that you need to think about. So, what I'm trying to say is like data security strategy will kind of like make sure it sets the guidelines for a lot of these things, right? So you need to start thinking about you need to kind of like I said, you have to proactively go and look for some of these things, right? Large companies, that's one of the things that you should have, right? Then implementing a comprehensive data classification strategy across the data set is kind of like important, right? So you classify it based on things like sensitivity, what is the value, think about regulatory requirements and all that kind of stuff. That will kind of like lead you to things like what is the data that needs to be encrypted. How do you kind of like set access controls for that? All those kind of things will start to emerge out of that, right? Just managing access control for data itself is actually a pretty big thing for a lot of these companies, right? So people come and go, like start people will come and go. So a lot of people, like some of the larger organizations I've worked with, right? If we have AD authentication, we kind of like try and make sure any new tool that we acquire will kind of like have those kind of things, so that when the person leaves the organization, right, all they need to take is because it's using AD for authentication, right? You don't need a username password kind of thing, so it's kind of like controlled, right? So kind of like authentication and authorization, so things like principle of least privilege and all those kind of things need to be implemented. One of the things that actually happen, right, these days, one of the things that we worry about in a lot of large organizations is a lot of proliferation of SaaS products. Not that it is a bad thing, right? But what that does is it's so much easy for someone with a credit card to basically sign up to a service, right? To access data or whatever it is. And then they put a lot of data into that SaaS products. And then suddenly when someone like who manage those people, this is the whole shadow IT problem. Where when someone leaves the organization, do they still have access to the data that they put into the SaaS product and things like that? This is something that is a constant worry, right? So look, we large organizations typically have things like design authorities and so on and so forth. So when they are introducing new tools and applications, right, they go through a checklist of things like who's going to be managing the access control. Does it have AD authentication, right? Do you have things in place when someone starts and someone leaves the organization? Do you have a mechanism? If you're maintaining it internally within a certain team, do you have those things to actually control that, right? What happens when there is a breach of data within that SaaS application? How does that work? So a lot of these things actually come in, right? Now we also worry about things like part of that overall, like a large organization. When you look at the data, right? Is the data kind of like encrypted? Like the CI thing, availability of those things. Are they, doing simple backups and recovery? What happens when you sign up to a SaaS product and then you decided to finish that engagement kind of thing, right? Are you able to get the data back from them? How long do they actually hold on to the data, right? All those kind of things. Again, like good governance and policies and all those kind of things is essential to getting these things done, right? Look, one of the things like large organizations, when we sign up new partners or new tools and things like that, right? Depending on how much of data is stored, we just generally give them like a really big questionnaire that has lots of questions.
Yeah.
Like, you're probably familiar with it, right? You sign up to
Yeah.
a big
Yeah.
bank or something, you got to fill out this big questionnaire. It's got all these questions like, what compliance do you have? Like, who has within your organization access to this data,
Yeah.
right? All those kind of things is very important. Like, do you have contractors? Like, do the contractors have access to this data?
Yeah. I mean, like, this is quite fascinating because I remember distinctively working with, two different clients, one from the US and one from the Australia by itself. Like,
Yeah.
let's just leave the names out of it. So they even went to a point in asking, are non-citizens accessing our data?
Yeah.
And do you have any local citizens that will be just accessing the data, especially when it comes to federal regulations in the US or
Yeah.
government regulations in the Australia, especially when it comes to the data security laws and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
That's something that they keep double clicking on. So when we get these questionnaires, some of these questions really flip us out, from oh wow, okay, we didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Look, I've worked with a lot of these, lot of people, right? First time they actually go through. Look, I've been on both sides of the fence, right? I've been the one who's actually filling out questionnaires, and I've been the one who's actually saying, "Hey, go fill out this questionnaire." So I've seen both sides of it, right? And some of these things could be challenging, but if you're a smaller organization going through this, right? Getting through one or two of these questionnaires actually gets your mind thinking as well, like, oh, okay, I need to do these things, I need to put these things in place, I need to change this, and so on and so forth. So it does help when you work with a large customer, like a large client, right, who's very demanding. So,
No, absolutely. Because, that's the feedback that I keep giving to my product team, from where I am, because, I'm customer facing. So it's important for me to feed that, feedback back up the chain so they keep evolving as well.
yeah.
I think I think I've broadly covered really what I really want to cover. I know it's a short, but a very powerful discussion. And, I really want to thank you again for taking your time on a Friday evening. Trust me, you could have done a lot of better things, but thank you so much for, being part of the series.
More than welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.